Привет. How are you doing? So, whoa, I'm shouting. So I guess this is the Angular talk of the conference, and we're going to talk actually about, in my opinion, one of the most exciting things coming to Angular. I think I waited something like 2 years to that release to become stable, and it's about to be stable in the next few weeks. And here we are. We're going to speak today about Angular Ivy and everything you should know about Ivy and the future of Angular, where we're going after this compiler will be released. So before that, how many of you are actually Angular developers? Ooh, wow, that's great. So about myself, and how many of you already heard about Angular Ivy? Most of you. Great. So I'm Eliran. I'm the founder and CEO of a company named eSquare. We are a consulting and training company, mostly in the Israeli market, and we're doing only Angular. I'm a GDE for Angular, Google Developer Expert for Angular and Web Technologies. I'm one of the organizers of Angular App annual conference in Tel Aviv and Angular IL group, which is one of the biggest Angular communities in the world, and also a writer in Angular in Depth. And you can find me anywhere, Twitter and in those medias. So after a long wait, Angular Ivy is about to be officially released in version 9. And this is a great opportunity for all of us to start playing with it. And before we dive into it, I'll give a short reminder about what is Ivy and why exactly the core team went to a fair time replacement of the renderer and compiler. Before that, I don't know how many of you actually checking the changelog of Angular, but this came a few weeks ago, and we're all waiting for version 9 to get released. And this saying that Angular now compiles with Ivy by default. So this is really exciting news for all of us. Flashback, short history for those who don't know. Ivy is actually the third compiler shipped by the core team. It started from version 2 with the template compiler. In version 4, we had the view engine, and now we have Ivy. This is actually a rewrite and replacement of the view engine, but the most important thing is happening under the hood. And for most use cases, it's going to be transparent for you as developers, since it's going to be 100% backward compatible. So why Ivy? Why are we changing the compiler? Why are we changing the render engine? And mainly because of this device that we are all holding. And I know it sounds funny, but those facts made me worried about the world and where we're going. 63% of all US online traffic comes from smartphones and tablets. By the end of this year, nearly 80% of internet usage is expected to be from mobile phones. Wow. So that means that we are, as developers, we are now challenging to develop applications which are more mobile friendly, okay? And we're trying to achieve a better user experience for our mobile users. And we're asking ourselves what we can do. We're just developing our application, but what we actually can do. So there is a lot we can do, and actually should use CDNs to serve our application from the closest cloud. I really hope you're doing it, using the lazy loading coming from Angular, and today we're going to see how we can do it for only components and not the entire module. And we should use PWA's strategies to cache the assets or cache the whole application, except for the network requests, of course, but also maybe cache those. But those three things can actually improve our user experience for mobile application. But the biggest opportunity we have as developers is actually reducing the bundle. We want to ship as minimum as byte for our application. So I took my website, eliassy.web, Eliassy.dev, sorry, as a use case. And this is just a website. It's written in Angular, right? And actually, this is a website I'm sharing talks of myself and all the session I gave. It's written in Angular. It uses the PWA package. As you can see, it supports offline. And any guesses? What's the bundle size of just a single page app? That's simple, showing some divs and videos tags. Few megabytes now. No way. Try again. Somebody else? You're right. Give her the price. 1 gigabyte. No. So actually, the size is just a bit than 500 kilobytes, which sounds not really efficient just for a single page application showing some data, right? So let's opt in Ivy, okay? How we actually opting in Ivy? So we have a tsconfig app JSON file. And the only thing we should do is just in the Angular compiler option section, add enable Ivy true, okay? And that will add Angular Ivy to our, change the compiler from View Engine to Ivy. And after that, it's cut the bundle size to just a bit than 400 kilobytes, which is a 50% cut. That actually means that our website is now faster in 15 kilobytes, in 50%. Sorry. Some of you might be disappointed that it's only 15%, but the reason for that this application is actually relying on a lot of core features. And the truth is, the core team is still working on improving this thing, but this is quite impressive because we didn't do anything, just change the compiler, and now we cut the bundle. So you're asking yourself, how does it work? And that's what we're going to answer in the next few minutes. And for that, let's go deep dive into the compiler by giving one example. And the example is going to be this simple div, okay? We have a div that inside of it we have a span with a title which is binded, and just a child component with an ngIf. Simple one. Now, does any of you had the chance to build your application without Webpack or without running the ngserve command or ngbuild command? Yes? No? You still tired from the food? From lunchtime? Yeah? So, actually to do this, we can just run this command, okay? This is the ngc command to run the Angular compiler. And if we do so, we actually can see the differences between the View Engine and Ivy. And we will see it in a second, but one of the most biggest changes that we don't have factories files anymore. And all the decorators that we have now became static functions inside the component instance. And this is important because we're going to see later in this session why it's important. Now we have a static function called ngComponentDef, which we can use to get all the metadata we need for the components, and not only the metadata, also the change detection, reference, and those things. So this is the code of the compiler, actually the transpiled code coming from the View Engine, okay, before Ivy. And as you can see that our div and span transpiled to just a huge line with a lot of nulls, array with a lot of nulls, and just a div and a span. And if you're asking yourself, what is it? Those all the bindings for ngStyle, and maybe if you have ngClass or other directives that comes from Angular or attributes that comes from Angular, you're actually paying for that in bytes. And in Ivy, it's much more smaller. If you check Ivy, you just get this, which is, if you see the div and the span, they are more alone. And what's really good about it, it's tree shaking. Yeah, that's funny. It's tree shaking most of the things that you are not using And you know what's funny about reshaking? Every time I'm talking about reshaking, people coming and asking me, hey, wait, why should I use reshaking? Well, why I need it? Because most of the time I'm writing code. I don't write code that I'm not using. Somebody here write code that is not using? Yeah, over there. You are my man. I'm doing it all the time, believe me. No, but this is a really key factor to understand in Angular, because when you're looking for tree shaking, it's not for your code. It's actually for third companies libraries that you are using, like RxJS, for example. You're using switch map. You don't want to pay for all the operators, right? So we achieved the idea of bundle size reducement, okay, with Ivy. We understand that. Let's go to a second key part in Ivy. And for that, I will go again to the transpiled code with Ivy in View Engine. And if I focus in one specific line, I can see that the ngIf is coming with a binding to a view container ref and template ref. And I'm asking myself, what the heck is those dependencies? I didn't wrote anywhere view container ref and template ref. And if you're asking yourself where it's coming from, anyone has the answer? Yes, no? Still tired from lunch? So the answer is those are actually dependencies of the ngIf, but they actually compiled in my transpiled code, in my app component transpiled code. View container ref and template ref are actually dependencies of ngIf, and in Ivy, if we look again on the ngIf part, wait a second, this one, we're seeing that we have binding to only ngIf. Now, with Ivy, every component now references components and directive through much more cleaner public API. And with that, if we're changing something in ngIf, we don't have to compile the old application again. We just need to compile the ngIf again, right? So with that, we can achieve two major things. The first one is faster compilation, and the second one is an easier way to ship libraries to NPM. Amazing. So another great thing coming with Ivy is the ability to debug your template in a much easier way. And what I mean by that, let's check it with example. So I create just a component, an easy component named app component, which have title and show, okay? And in my template, I'm adding an input, okay, with binding to the input event. And there I'm invoking a search function, which not really exists in my component class, right? Before Ivy, the error wasn't that informative. We had something like the co-search is not a function, okay? And if you look in Ivy, look at the second line, you're getting that it's coming from the app component inside the template, inside input on the input event listener. And you can show, it's actually giving you the direction to where it's happening in your template, what's happening on your template. And if speaking about templates, Angular Ivy also brings the ability to add templates type checking. And now we can do it by changing those two in the Angular compiler options, the full template type check and strict templates. And if we change those two to true, we get into a strict mode on templates. What does it mean? It means that now Angular is actually going to check those bindings that they really exist on the class. And not only that, for example, if you use the ng4 directive, it also gives it a type and not only the any type. That means that if you wrap something inside your ng4 and you're using, let's say, let user of users, it actually checks that the user of is it in type user, okay, and not only type any. So now the selling points for Ivy are clear to us. We have all those things, but the immediate question is, okay, I have Ivy, Ivy's here, great. What's coming up next? And what I will try to do in the next 30 minutes I have 45, but what we're going to do next is we talk about the future of Ivy and the idea of standalone components in the post-Ivy. And if you ask me, one of the biggest problem I had with Angular is going to be solved with those new public, they're not public APIs yet. But let's talk about the future. So where are we starting? We're starting from this idea of just having one simple component. And this is just a simple component, okay? Counter component. It's as just a button for a plus, okay? And reset. When you're clicking the plus, we're just adding one to the component. When you're clicking the reset, we are resetting the counter and also emitting an event. This is in a nutshell the all basic idea of using Angular, right? We have inputs, outputs, just a simple component with a class and a template. And we actually creating those components that we can use them with, we can use the custom HTML selector to show them, right? Now, in order to use this custom selector, I will have to do this. Create NgModule, declare our counter component in it, also add it to the exports declaration array. Then I have to bootstrap this module, import the counter module inside my application module, and only then I can actually start using the custom selector I have, right? I've checked the Angular docs and I found this. A component must belong to an NgModule. And I have to admit that I have a huge problem with that statement, because NgModules for me are much more than just a single component, right? NgModule has injector, providers, DI, and many more other than just a simple component. NgModule, if you ask me, are kind of representing applications. And I've only wanted to render a single component. My point is, applications are not really components. Sometimes we just want to render one component without being tied to any application. And what's really shiny about Ivy, it gives us the ability to do it in a matter of just a simple component, just a simple function. Render component. But there is a price. And what's the price? As we said, NgModules defines more than just components. NgModules defines injectors, zones, and providers. And if we're going to create our standalone components without declaring them in our modules, we will handle those things by ourselves. Want to see it in action? If you're not going to shout yes, so I'm going to stay here. You want to see it in action? Let's see it in action. So we're going to have 5 different demos that going to, I'm going to use a lot of those prefix with theta functions, the render component function, the detect changes, and directive inject. And if you're asking yourself, hey, where is this theta sign on my keyboard? Unless you're coming from Greece, you don't really have it. And and this is actually not a mistake, it's on purpose. This means that those API are still private. The core team still don't want you to use those things in production. And this is always translated in my mind, hey, Eliran, go use those things, deploy your application to production with them. And that's what we're going to do in the next few minutes. So the first demo is the standalone component. So, let's go to the code. Wait a second. Great. So we have this simple counter as we... Now you can see it. We have this simple counter. When I'm clicking on the plus, it's raising the counter. When I'm resetting, it's raising it to 0, right? Easy. Now, instead of just using Everybody can see it, or it's big enough? Great. Instead of just using this custom selector, let's use this data render component, okay, with the counter component. Let's see what's happening. We're getting an error, and the error is host node with selector not found. Actually, what's happening here is that when we're trying to render the component, Angular is looking for the selector, and we said we don't want to use this selector, so we can actually declare any host that we want. Let's declare an host. Let's say my host, okay? And here I can create my host. And now I have the counter component. Cool, no? It works. Hey, let's click on the plus. I'm actually clicking. You can't see it, but I'm clicking. You can see? He's my witness. So, what's happening here? Why it's not working? Any idea? Output not working. No, it's not really that, but you know what? Maybe I can help you with that. Let's add some console log when we actually clicking on the plus, okay? So I'm just logging the counter value, okay? Here and also in the reset. Let's see what's happening. We're getting the output, yeah. Change detection, yeah. As we said before, NgModules define zones for us, right? Without them, we don't really have change detection. And how are we going to deal with that? So Ivy is also giving us a function called theta detect changes, which is just a function coming from Angular core. It's still a theta detect changes, okay? It really reminds us the change detection that we have on the change detector ref, but I don't need any DI, I don't need zones, I don't need anything. I'm just clicking here, add distinct function, and it works. Great, no? Now, let's do something more interesting. I have here a service called storage service, okay? And this service is going to send to somewhere, some fake URL. We're not going to send it to somewhere, but I'm going to send the counter value, okay? And I want to use it. This one is actually using the HTTP client. Let's go back to our counter and let's implement the save button, okay? So I already have the save button. I just want to wire it up. So first, let's add the save function. And before that, we want to use a service. So I'm adding a constructor. And let's add the storage service to this class. And here, save counter with the counter value. And to invoke it, I also have to subscribe to it, right? I'm getting an error. What's happened now? Inject must be called from an injection context. Why we don't have an injection context? Because we're running outside of modules. And who's setting the injection context? The module. Who has an injection context? The application who wrap this counter, right? So we actually can go again to this application, and here we have two options. The first one, we can add a constructor and inject the injector, which is, this is the best line I ever seen. Inject the injector. So let's inject the injector. And here, I can config in the render component function injector and say, hey, this is this injector, right? The injector is the injector. And it works. Not only that, when we're clicking the save, we actually sending the post to nowhere, so we're getting an error, but we're actually invoking the HTTP request. We have an injection context outside a component which is rendered outside the module without an injection context. We actually set the injector. Want to see a better way to do it? Let's, instead of using the injector from the DI, if you don't want to use the DI, so I can just create an injector here and say theta directive inject. And here, this is a function asking for the injection token of what I'm trying to inject. Injector. Let's clear this. So it used the injector from the ngOnInit function. And everything still works great. Right? Let's see. And when I'm clicking here and sending save, it still works. So we have the opportunity to learn about how the things happening under the hood inside the compiler. Those functions actually, the functions that Angular are using inside their compiler. They are not public yet, but they might be, so it's good to know them. And now let's go to our second demo for today. Second demo for today, Async Pipe. How many of you using the Async Pipe? How many of you think it's really important to have the Async Pipe? So the Async Pipe is amazing thing. It's really one of the most, because Angular is really relying on RxJS, and most of the things we are using are observables. Async Pipe is so great because it's subscribing to an observable. It's also auto-unsubscribe to an observable when you're destroying your component. And it also do something really important that not many knows, but it's calling the change detection. It's using the function mark for check, okay? And this is the reason when you are using the async pipe, you shouldn't be worried about change detection because the async pipe is doing it for you. But let's go to the code again. Sorry. Yeah. I have some slides that I want to show you before. So let's see a simple example of using the async pipe. I have a service which, just a component which getting some posts from JSON placeholders, okay, from the net. It's not really important what I'm getting. I'm getting those post array, and I'm just showing them with an async pipe on the template. Really easy. What you usually doing on your any Angular application probably. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but the async pipe is, if it's relying on the change detector F, it's also relying on zones. And we said that most of the time, if we going to have those standalone components, we're not going to have zones, right? So let's go back here. Sorry. And this is the actually the component that I showed you. If you don't believe me, the easiest way to shut down zones is just go to the main TS file. You can go to the configuration of the Bootstrap module and set ngZone to noop. And now I don't have anything on the screen, right? When we don't have zone, async pipe is not efficient anymore. So you're asking yourself, hey, whoa, I'm using async pipe, and you just told me this is one of the most important part of Angular, and you have to use it. But what's the solution? What's coming up next instead of it? So what we're going to have after this is something that's called the push pipe, and I have it here on my repo. This actually, this is not my implementation. This implementation is of a guy called Manfred, an Austrian guy, another GDE and an amazing guy. And I'm going to keep it in the repo so you can have a look on it later on. I'm going to share the slides and repo with you, so you can check what's happening here. The idea is it's going to detect changes, but it's going to not be relying on zones. It's still coming in the future and still not ready yet. Okay? Yeah. So, demo number 3. on push components. And if we already mentioned the mark for check function, I'm good with time, yeah. If we already mentioned the mark for check function, let's go to another example to demonstrate how we're going to handle on push components. And on push, it's really an important optimization in our Angular applications. So let's have a look on this example. We have here two components, okay? This is the container component, which have just a behavior subject with streams, initial stream of numbers 1, 2, and 3, okay? This is a child component that subscribes to the data and getting it from an input, okay? Amazing. Now, let's enable zones again, because otherwise nothing will work for us. Great. If I'm clicking here, everything works and great. Now let's go to the child component, and the only thing I'm going to do is change the change detection strategy to change detection strategy on push. Now it's not working. I'm clicking again. You see the guy that I'm clicking. So I'm going to solve it. Before Ivy, we had a function on the change detector ref called mark for check, right? Will help us with those kind of situation, and it works with the mark for check function. But in Ivy, we said not all the time we have the I. We want to have functions for that we just can import from Angular core. So again, we have something called mark dirty, that just getting the component instance, and without the I, without anything, we run the mark for check function. Amazing. We're getting to the end. Demo number 4. Dynamic import. And this is, if you ask me, one of the most important parts of Angular being more dynamic and being more efficient to the users. And let's understand the example first. It's something happened to me a lot lately. I think most of my clients now using those intercoms. You know what I'm talking about? The small chat box you have on the footer of the website, and it's everywhere. It's on every page. And when you have this small chat box on your layout, they're probably going to end up in your main bundle unless you loading them dynamically. Those kind of things can be really heavy. It can be some hundreds of kilobytes. And if you if you analyze how many of users actually using those things, you can find out that only 2% or even less than that actually using those chatbots. And I always ask myself, hey, why should I pay for it as part of my main bundle? Angular 8, the last version, introduced lazy loading of modules using ES6 import functions, right? Now we're actually using the router like that. Why don't we try to do the same thing directly on components? So let's do it. I have here just a page. Let's add a click function, okay? Adding a button, click me. And implementing the click event, okay? Load counter. I'm going to load the counter. Cool. Inside of it, I'm going to import directly the component path. So let's go to, counter component. Here I'm going to get a promise, which will return me something. And here, which function I want to use? Render component. Only one is actually listening to me, huh? I want to use the C counter component, right? So let's already declare the host to be counter host, counter, for example, okay? And the injector to this injector. So we won't wait for that. And let's add the host to our page. Yeah, great. Dynamic. Now, let's have a look on our website in the JS section. And when I'm clicking the click me button, oh, I forgot to do something. Yeah. What's happened here is that we already, the counter component is part of our main bundle already. Why? Because it's part of our app module. So we have to clear it first. And we also have to clear it from the, here, the first example we had. Now that we cleared all the other counter component references in our application, if we click on the click me, we're paying just now. You witness what's happened? I will do it again. Check the JS section. When I'm clicking, I'm paying. This is the actually counter module, okay, the counter component, okay, and we paid for it only now, only on the event of clicks, and this is really important because you actually can load not only modules, you can load components on user events and not only on routes events, okay? Great. HOCs. How many of you know what are higher order components? Only a few. You are the React developers? Yeah? Welcome to Angular. So, that's actually going to be our last example for today. And we're going to have, what is an higher order function, okay? Or higher order component? This is actually a function which gets a component and returns a component, but because this is a function, we also can affect the component in between, okay? And before that, we couldn't really do anything to the component because we don't have the ng component def on the instance. And as we understand already, with Ivy, now we have everything we need on the component instance and we can play with it. So our last example for today is going to be on something that I'm quite sure most of you really care about when you implementing your Angular application with RxJS. I'm going to implement an unsubscriber HOC. And what I mean by that? Let's have a look of the last example for today. We have a timer component, okay, which ticks every 1 second. Inside of it, I have a pipe, which, by the way, on destroy, I'm just console logging the counter value, okay? And inside of it, inside the subscription, I'm also adding a pipe, okay, a tap operator to console log the counter value. Why I'm doing that? To show that even though that I'm destroying the component without unsubscribing, the subscription is still alive, right? We have another wrapper. Okay, this is a wrapper component. We just adding the app timer with an ngIf alive, we destroying it and revive it. Okay, let's go to the code. Up. Yeah. So this is our HOC. Let's have a look at the console as well. Yeah, let's refresh. Okay, so we have the timer component which ticks every 1 second. The console ticks, the timer clicks. That ticks. If I'm going to destroy it, the component stops, the console still ticking. If I will revive the components, what's going to happen? Another subscription. That's correct. If I'm going to destroy it again, revive it again, I will have the third one, and this is how actually you're creating your memory leaks in your Angular applications. Who's doing that a lot? Again, you? No? So, let's see how we can leverage the power of HOCs together with Angular IV capabilities to implement an auto unsubscriber. So, I'm exporting a function called unsubscriber. Yeah. This function will return a function who's getting the component type. Okay. First, we want to save the original factory. Where we're getting the factory from? From the component type. We have ngComponentDef, ngComponentDef factory. Now, when we have the factory, we can just override it to get a function who's getting the args, okay? And here, we can actually create a component instance. How? I'm going to just invoke the original factory with the args. Let's here return the component, here return the component type, okay? Yeah, and in between, for now, let's just console log the component instance. Yeah. So far, how we can use this function? Think about Angular, the Angular way. No dependency injection, but maybe decorators, okay? So let's go to our timer component, okay? And let's add another decorator on subscriber. Yeah, now I have to rebuild the application again. Faster compilation with Ivy. Yeah. And if we have a look, we're actually getting the timer component instance on the console log. Easy, so far. This is the basic of HOCs, okay? We're getting the component type, we can create the component instance. Don't break the flow, we're just returning the component instance, but now let's do something in between. And what we want to do in between? Unsubscribe to all of those subscriptions. So I'm going to get back to my HOC, and here, instead of just console log them, I will do the next thing. First of all, I will take the ngComponent type, ngComponentDef, and if I know Angular, I know that on it, I have something that's called onDestroy. OnDestroy, I'm going to override it to get a function. What I want to do in this function. First, I don't want to just override the user onDestroy, so I'm going to check first if the component instance have something that's called ngOnDestroy. What I want to do with it? Just invoke it, okay? Because this is the hook of onDestroy, and I'm just wanna don't lose the user onDestroy function. Now, I want to take object keys of the component instance and just iterate on each and every key and check if this key is type of subscription. If subscription is a function that I already implemented. If you want, it's in this repo. You can have a look on it later on. Is subscription. So I wanna take the component key. Sorry. Yeah. If the component key is of type subscription, what I want to do? Just unsubscribe from it. That's correct. Unsubscribe. Looks good. Let's check it. Cross fingers for me. The component is ticking, the console is ticking. I'm clicking the destroy. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Before we go, Angular 9 is about to be released. It's already in RC, and if we're talking about Angular Ivy, which is probably the important part of Angular 9, that's coming in Angular 9, but it's not only Ivy, so I think I have to mention it. Inside of it, there is a lot of new features that part of them are really mind-blowing, and part of them are some improvements that we are waiting for them. So it's really, if you ask me, it's good to mention that. The phone control name now accepts not only strings, it accepts also numbers. The testbed get is deprecated, and now we have testbed inject, which actually not going just to return us any type. It will give us actually types. View child, the static true or false. Now static is by default false, so most of the time you have false, you don't have to add it, you can just use view child directly. There is a better localization support with the Angular localized package. We upgraded to TypeScript 3.6. Module with providers is now a generic class, and you actually know which module, which type of module you're actually returning. Entry component is deprecated. If you're asking yourself why, so the talk today is actually the reason for this. Now the ng component def is part of the component instance, and you don't have to pre-compiled it, and many other improvements that you can check in the Angular changelog. How you updating? Just a simple line of code. Just ng update Angular CLI Angular core once it will be released. If you're brave enough to check the RC version, just run the second command, ng update Angular CLI at next and Angular core at next. Let's summarize what we had today. So Ivy, the third generation of Angular compiler, is just around the corner, and it's coming with a lot of exciting features like standalone components, smarter change detection, easier dynamic loading of modules and components, HOCs, and I haven't spoke about it today because of time, but it also sets the ground to Angular Ivy to become much more popular, Angular Elements, sorry, to become much more popular in our day-to-day. I know it's not stable yet, but I really encourage you to give it a try right now. I will post on Twitter all my slides, repos, and everything we had today. But if you want to deep dive on Angular Ivy and standalone components, I wrote 2 popular blog posts about those topics. Ivy is coming, and the future of standalone components in Angular Ivy. You can find them there on Angular in depth, of course. That's it. I'm going to be outside for questions if anyone needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eliran, for your talk, and we are ready to discuss the questions.
Sure.
Yeah, please take a seat. And our first question is from, maybe a glass of whiskey, wine, or
vodka. I heard that vodka is really good in Russia, no?
Super good. Yeah, vodka is the best product in Russia, except of snow. And Angular Router has a router reuse strategy.
Yeah.
So it detaches some HTML nodes, components, and store it in memory to faster render. So the question is this API still useful with Ivy or not?
Yeah, this specific APIs have nothing with Ivy actually. This API is, thanks. This API is going to be still stable with Ivy. There's nothing to do with Ivy.
Mm. And the next question from the same person. So can I get rid of zone when using Ivy and do not trigger change detection always manually with on-push strategy?
So anytime I'm giving this talk, people really think that, hey, zones are going to disappear in the near future. It's not really like that. The idea is to have the ability to be without zones. Zones are heavy in bundle, and they are hard to understand. Zones are great until they are not. And yeah, because who's ran into a zone problem? What you did? You just throw the computer away. I mean, nobody except for GLE, I think that the guy who wrote zones know how to handle those things. So I don't think that zones are really going to disappear from the all applications, but zones are definitely going to be, we're going to reduce the use of zones and the decoupled of zones in standalone components. And that's it.
Okay, are you familiar with Dev Extreme library? Because we have question about it and
Dev Extreme?
Yeah, I don't know. I never heard about it.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
So skip the question, sorry. Can Ivy help to create pluggable components that loaded in runtime? For example, load library components in some editor app, which are created by another project?
Absolutely, 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 absolutely. Yeah, there is a, I haven't mentioned it, but there is a compiler, the NgCC, which is supposed to make sure that also external library is going to be supported for Ivy, and you can do anything I did today with Ivy.
And next question is, can you add directive for components in Ivy in a dynamic way, in a dynamic way?
I'm quite sure you can. I haven't tried it, honestly, but it sounds like you can. I mean, you have the ng component def, and you probably can, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and looks like we have the last question. Last question. No, we have another questions. So TypeScript 3.7 optional chaining, huge thing.
Everybody waiting for that.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know something about it? Should I try install 3.7 with Angular? When it?
I don't think Angular is yet support fully 3.7. By the way, Angular is already supporting chaining in templates a long time ago. You can chain inside your templates, check if you have some object and go deep inside of it. I'm not sure about 3.7 in Angular. I'm quite sure it's not fully support, because there is a reason why they support only 3.6. But you know, Angular 9 haven't released yet.
And by the way, Angular Dart support optional chaining from the beginning, just in case, maybe you love Dart. And the question is Angular planning to make form group generic class?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a nice topic. I just tweeted about it a few weeks ago. We had a discussion about making the form group object a generic type. Was actually one of the biggest issues. I have a lot of issues with forms, okay? I think this is a masterpiece, don't get me wrong. The forms is an amazing thing in Angular. Maybe the best things came out of this core team. But if you ask me, two main things are really bothering me. The first one is the form group is not typed. It's always a form group, but you want to have the type of, let's say, we are creating a form group of an address. And we know that address have a city and country and things like that. And you want to have a value which is already typed. We are on TypeScript. It's really easy to do it. And I also made a code snippet on how we can just convert just the type of the value. I mean, just create a typing for the value. So I don't remember what was the question. I'm sorry.
The question is Angular planning to make it?
I don't know if they're planning to do it. I know that it's coming from a lot of areas inside the community. So I'm pretty sure one day, I know that in the core team they focused about releasing Ivy as soon as possible, and they work on that project for more than 2 years. Once it's going to be released in the next few months, next few days, hopefully, officially. So basically, I guess that this topic will raise again. I started to say that I have 2 problems. I mentioned one. The other is the form group is not an immutable object. And a lot of time when you're working with state management libraries like NGRX or something like that, and you're trying to create a unidirectional flow with form groups and NGRX, you're getting into a lot of trouble because the form group is not immutable object. So I hope they're going to fix those 2 things.
Okay, unfortunately, we don't have time for next questions, but you can ask them in discussion zone. It's located near the, like in the other part of the room over there. I don't know how to explain it, but you will see. Okay, and thank you for your talk.
Thank you.